ventilation, especially to invite you to the conference. It's a great pleasure to be here. My name is Michel Serfaty. I'm working in Paris, Bichat, and this presentation has been made also in collaboration with the Coax Institute from Nantes. So I'm going to speak to you about cardiac anatomy and MRI technology. I think it's a very basic topic, but it's important to understand before you enter the field of cardiac MRI. And I will begin with a very simple slice on the heart, which in fact is, you can consider as being a pyramid with a base over here and an apex which is pointy, and this pyramid is on this slice looking towards the anterior part of the body. If now you cut this pyramid along the long axis of this pyramid, on the left side you're going to get the left atrium, the left ventricle, and in the left atrium you're going to see a little structure that is covering the top of the left ventricle, and this structure is called the left appendage, the left atrium appendage, which is an important structure because it is the location of most thrombus, especially in patients having natural fibrillation. What you see in this left atrium as well is the arrival of the few vessels, and some of them over here correspond to the pulmonary veins that are loaded with oxygen and that are going to then go in the left ventricle and in the aorta with the leaflets that you can see over here. In between the left atrium and the left ventricle, you can see a structure that is the mitral valve with long leaflet and short leaflet. And from this mitral valve, the blood goes in the left ventricle, where you can see a pillar. That is an important structure, as we're going to see in a second. If you look at the thickness of the muscle, you can see that in the left atrium it's a very thin structure, whereas in the left ventricle it's a very thick structure, and this is related to the pressure that you have in the aorta. The left ventricle needs to send blood in the aorta, which in fact is helpful because you have a high pressure, so you need a thick muscle, which is not the case in the left atrium, and therefore you have a thin thickness of the muscle on this part. If you now open the structure and leave in place the cordage that connect the pillars with the mitral valve, then you can see that you have sometimes one pillar, two pillars, three pillars. It's variable from one patient to another. And over here are represented three pillars that are connected to each mitral valve by cordages. These cordages are specific to the mitral valve and to the tricuspid valve, and they're important because if you imagine a dilatation of the left ventricle, then you can imagine that this pillar are going to have an influence on the cordage and therefore on the opening of the mitral valve, and therefore might have as a consequence the mitral valve insufficiency. What you can see as well is that on top of the left atrium, you do see like pulmonary veins that are represented over here, and the left atrial appendage that comes on top of the left ventricle, covering its basal part. Once again, the base of the heart, where you have the atrium, the apex, where you have the ventricle. This is a CT view representing the back of the left atrium with all the coronary veins, and you have variations in the anatomy of these veins, which are important to know, especially when you're working in the field of arrhythmias, knowing that most atrial fibrillations are related to points that are located, to trigger points that are located in pulmonary veins, and that can be easily shut with the radiofrequency ablations. So this is a normal view of the heart and the thorax. So now you can see the location of the heart. It's in its normal position with in appearance the right part of the heart, the right auricle, the right ventricle, the left ventricle and the left auricle being in the back of this presentation. So as you see, the right auricle or right atrium has, again, a structure that is called the right atrial appendage that covers the origin of the right ventricle. And again, you may find thrombus in this structure. Going to the right atrium, you do have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava that, in fact, in a way, do participate to the anatomy of this right atrium. We're going to see that in a second. If you open the right ventricle, you can see that it has the shape of a triangle, and this triangle is quite important to know because it is called the triangle of dysplasia. And why is it called that way? Because you do have, in certain disease, dysplasias of the lateral wall of the right ventricle that is from which originate very serious ventricular arrhythmias, especially in young people. So you have to search for anomalies of the wall, and we'll see that later with other presentations, especially in this triangle that goes from the apex of the right ventricle to the base of the right ventricle, where you find the tricuspid valve, to the top of the infundibulum, where you do originate the pulmonary trunk. You can see over here the pulmonary valve. Again, over here, the tricuspid valve is connected to pillars, to cordages, and such a large variability of the anatomy of these pillars in terms of numbers and location. If now you open the right auricle, you will find the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava, which are separated for an area that is called the isthmus of the vena, the isthmus that separates the vena cava from the tricuspid valve, where you can find the coronary vein, the coronary sinus. So this separation is called the Eustachian valvula. So why is it important to know this area? It is because in this isthmus do originate and circulate a lot of flutters. And flutters are part of the arrhythmias that you can find in the heart. And they can be treated by radiofrequency as well by creating a line of fibrosis that is going to cut the circulation in between this isthmus. So let's go now to the orientation of the slices that we want to work with when we're doing MRI. It's very simple. So the best way to learn about these orientations is to work on CT. So I'm going to show you some CT slices first. So this is an axoplane, and on this axoplane you're going to trace a line that goes from the center of the mitral valve that you can recognize over here, with the long mitral valve and the small mitral valve, to the apex of your left ventricle. Over here, the left ventricle, left auricle, right atrium, and right ventricle. So on this slice, then you're going to get this longitudinal two-cavity slice with, in the back, exactly what we saw on these anatomy slides, with the left atrium and the left ventricle separated by the long mitral valve, the small mitral valve, and trabulation along the wall of the left ventricle with pillars if you cut in other directions. So from this plan, you're going to position another one that goes from the center again, from the mitral valve to the apex of the left ventricle, so that you get a four-cavity orientation, and this four-cavity is going to make you recognize the right atrium, the tricuspid valve, here the right coronary artery, the right ventricle, and then the left ventricle, left atrium, and the mitral valve. On this slice, you're going to position an axial perpendicular slice that is going to lead you to the two-chamber small axis orientation that is the most important orientation to analyze the heart, with on the right, the right ventricle, and on the left ventricle, where you can objectivate pillars that are more or less thick, depending on the location of the slice you're looking at. So over here, the anterolateral pillar, and over here, the inferior lateral pillar. So it's not finished because you believe you have correct plans, but in fact this four-cavity is not a real four-cavity orientation, and then you need to go on again from this small axis to position a slice that goes from the center of the left ventricle to the right corner of the right ventricle so that you get a real concavity slice. And also, you can get another orientation that is called three cavity that is very useful to study valves that we're going to see. So you go from the center of the mitral valve, over here you can see the mitral valve annulus. You go from the center of this valve to the initiation of the aorta with the exhaust chamber. And this slice is going to give you a perfect visualization of the mitral valve, the long valve, the small valve, and the aortic valve that you can see at the same time. So if you want to study aortic valve insufficiency at the same time with the mitral valve insufficiency, or together with maybe a thickening of the septum, this is an excellent orientation. So let's move to MR. So what do you do with MR? You do exactly the same thing, except that instead of working on a three-dimensional volume, you're going to work with 2D acquisitions, which is going to be less accurate in terms of positioning, but which can be done very quickly if you use real-time sequences. So over here, you position the slice on this axial slice in between the right atrium and the right ventricle, so that you can get a long axis on your right atrium and right ventricle. You can also position a slice, as we saw, along the left ventricle and the left atrium, so that you get this 2D longitudinal view of your left ventricle. You can then position axial slices on your four-chamber cavity to get a two-chamber small axis view of your heart. This is like so it's pretty easy to identify over here. Well, sorry, it's pretty easy then to identify on these structures the different elements from your heart. Over here, the left ventricle, the right ventricle with a thick myocardium, which is different from the thin myocardium from the right ventricle, which is related to a low pressure of the pulmonary artery, which is not the case, of course, in the aorta. And then you go from the apex of your left ventricle to the base of your left ventricle, so that at one point you reach the mitral valve annulus and the origin of the aorta. Okay, here we are in the left atrium, and we don't recognize any thickened wall, which means you are in the left atrium. Okay, from these four cavities, from these small acquisition of opposition, like four cavities images that show you in a very nice manner the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium all together, which is useful to study the anomalies of the lateral wall of the left ventricle, of the septum, and of the lateral wall of the right ventricle all together. As well, in this view, you can have a good view of the pericardium that is thin, that is located in between layers that are in hyper signal on these fiesta sequences, and this pericardium over here is not thickened, which is an important thing to notice when you look at the pericardium. Okay, I go back to the previous view. Look at the advantage of this four-chamber view, where you can see an anomaly over here in the left atrium. It's pretty easy. So this is an myxoma, and this view helps you locate the position of this myxoma either in the left atrium or the left ventricle, as it shows you perfectly the four chambers. So unfortunately, my videos are not going to work for this presentation. I thought they would, but I'm having technical problems with the keyboard of my computer, so it doesn't matter really, but this was to show you the advantage of each of these views. And now moving back to coronary arteries, it's pretty important to have a good understanding of where and why coronary arteries to deliver blood and oxygen to in the heart. So over here you do have the left ventricle, the right ventricle, and you can see from the origin of the aorta the right coronary artery that goes along the right ventricle to deliver blood along the lateral wall of the right ventricle, but also to the basal inferior wall of the left ventricle and along the septum on its inferior part. we look at now the left coronary artery travels with the IVA interventricular artery along the septum, and it's going to provide oxygen to the septum on its anterior part through the septal arteries, and also it's going to deliver blood to the lateral wall of the left ventricle with the diagonals. You do have the circumflex artery as well, but that is going to deliver blood to the lateral wall of the left ventricle using the diagonals that can be even thicker and bigger than the circumflex artery itself. So why am I showing you that to you? Because we are doing perfusion imaging when we do heart analysis, and these perfusion images show you which territory is enhanced by the contrast you're going to inject. However, it's very difficult to know which artery does bring blood to your heart just looking at these slices from your myocardium. You're always sure that the anterior part over here, the anterior segments of your left ventricle is irrigated by the LAD. And you're always sure that the right ventricle is irrigated by the right coronary artery. However, for the other segments, you never know which coronary artery is bringing blood to. Either the circumflex or the right coronary artery, everything is dependent on the dominance of one or the other coronary artery. There is a fight between the right coronary artery and the left circumflex artery, which doesn't allow you, when you make a report, to say, okay, there is a hypoperfusion in the segment that is irrigated by the right coronary artery. You cannot say that. You can only say there is a hypoperfusion in the segment that is inferior septal. That's all you can say. So finally, one should know that the collaterals do exist between coronary arteries when there is a stenosis of one of these coronary arteries, especially when the stenosis comes slowly. And you can see here an example of an RCA obstruction in its number 2 segments. And this occlusion is compensated by collateral coming from the circumflex artery in its lower segment. So you do see these collaterals. And if you make a perfusion imaging of your heart, you're going to believe that everything is okay, but in fact it's not, and you do have an occlusion of the right coronary artery that you're not going to be able to see. So there is a complementary information coming from these perfusion imaging we have with MRI and with these anatomical images that we can get from CT or from fluoroscopy. Over here in the image, I wanted to show you of coronary capillaries that especially do give blood to the subendocardium, and the end of these coronary capillaries do reach the subendocardium at the end of their trip, let's say, of their anatomical location. Why is it important? Because when you have a stenosis or an occlusion of the coronary artery, the first area to suffer in your heart is going to be the subendocardium and not the subepicardium. And we'll come back to that, as it is a very important feature when you analyze a heart with the different sequences we're going to see. Moving to valves, you can see that there is a skeleton in your heart. And this skeleton is a fibrous skeleton that is made of annulus. Over here, the annulus of the mitral valve, over here the tricuspid valve, here the aorta, the aortic valve, and in the back, the pulmonary valve. So this skeleton is the base of a very tight collaboration between each of these annulus and each valve during the heart motion. So you can see that you have two kinds of valves. You do have the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve that are not connected to any part of the left ventricle or right ventricle wall through the cardiac. They are totally independent. This is not the case of the mitral valve and tricuspid valve that are connected, as we saw, by cartilages and through the pillars to the wall of the left and the right ventricle. And this is pretty important to understand, as pathologies from the left and right ventricle, especially the wall, will lead to anomalies of to valvular disease as well. Whereas when you have pathologies of the left and right ventricle, you don't have consequences on the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve. So it's a different approach due to the anatomy. The last word that I'm going to give you on the anatomy of the nerves, you do have over here the sinoatrial node that is located in the superior vena cava, and over here the atrioventricular node that is located very close to the tricuspid annulus, close to the septum. And this atrioventricular node is going to give birth to the his trunk, the atrioventricular trunk that is going to divide in different branches, with one that is going to travel along the septum. Why am I showing you that today? Because any pathology that is going to touch the septum, especially fibrosis, is going to potentially be associated with arrhythmias, severe arrhythmias, and if not speaking about ventricular tachycardias, and maybe of a bad prognosis in the flow of the patient. So knowing the anatomy of these nerves is important to understand why pathology in these areas can lead to major complications. Okay, so this is it with the anatomy, and I'm going to talk to you now about MRI techniques that are necessary to perform cardiac MRI. So I divided this talk in two levels because it's not easy to talk about MRI techniques to everyone at the same time. So level one, I would say, is the easiest for who doesn't really know MR, doesn't really know the technique, but wants to get in the field of cardiac MR pretty quickly, and this person should know it's very simple. It's very simple if you have a good technologist. So the first thing you need to understand that any acquisition is going to be based on the electrocardiogram, and over here this is the R interval that is going to be critical during the acquisition. So when you connect your patient before the examination, please spend time to have a great connection and to have a great AKJ. If you don't have a good AKJ before the acquisition of your images, you're going to get bad images. You know that, and you need to spend time. There is no need to begin a bad examination and to go to the end of the examination if you don't have a good AKJ. Spend time. So the first sequence that we're using is a black blood imaging sequence. Why black blood imaging sequence? Well, this sequence has a weight of T2 usually, and the aim is to identify edema in your myocardium. This is a small axis view of your left ventricle and your right ventricle, and you can see on the anterior segment of your left ventricle a hypersignal that you might analyze as an edema. So this is something you're going to look for in patients with a heart or a chest pain, and we'll come back to that later in terms of heart attack that you may take as an edema where in fact might be a slow flow. So edema, this is what you're looking for with this sequence. Over here, you're using a sequence that is removing the signal from the fat at the same time. It's called a triple-IR sequence, and you can see very easily in the anterior segment of your left ventricle a hypersignal that corresponds to edema, and in this case it was connected to a myocardial infarction. On the left side, you do see also very clearly a hypersignal in the anterior wall of your left ventricle, but also on the anterior lateral and anterior septal wall of your left ventricle. Again, this was not normal, and it was related in this case to a myocarditis. We'll come back to how to differentiate myocarditis and myocardial infarction later in this talk. So, after you've done these edema, let's say, sequences or black blood sequences, you're going to move to cine MRI sequences, which are called, depending on the brand that you're using, Fiesta on GE, Truefish on Siemens, and SS17 on Philips. So these sequences are steady-state precession sequences, and unfortunately I cannot show you the cine on these images, but the next presenters will show you many cine, don't worry about it. And these cine help you analyze the thickening of the wall of the left ventricle especially, but also of the right ventricle, which are critical when you are looking for an anomaly of your heart. So it's always very useful to analyze this thickening on a small axis, a longitudinal 2D axis, and a core cavity axis, which give you separate information. Usually you do have an ejection fraction that is normal around 60% of your left ventricle. We'll come back to that. But for people who don't want to contour the endoluminal border of your left ventricle, because it takes time, a very easy way to analyze quickly, to have a good idea of this ejection fraction, is to look at the thickening of the anterior wall, of the inferior wall of the left ventricle, of the septum, and of the lateral wall. So on these two views, if you give 15% to each of these walls, in terms of quantity of thickening, then at the end you do get 60%. If you see an anomaly, however, in the anterior wall, then you will lower these 60% and visually assess your ejection fraction to something that would be like 45–50%. And it's very useful because it will also help you be sure that what you measured with the software is close to what you're seeing with your eyes, which is sometimes maybe different. So another advantage of these sequences is that you can see valve insufficiencies over here, the phasing of the flow that goes in the exhaust chamber during systole, and these valve insufficiencies are important to identify, although the sequence is not capable of quantifying such insufficiencies. You can also see over here with the T2 on T1 weighting, these sequences are weighted T2 or over T1 depending on the alpha. You can see over here with a hypersignal pericardium fluid that is major and that is basically compressed, that is going to compress the walls of your heart, which will develop some other signs that we will see later. So how can you quantify this ejection fraction? You're going to use a Simpson technique. What is it? So what you're going to do is that you're going to contour the endoluminal line border of your left ventricle and the epicardium of your left ventricle. And you're going to do that during diastole and at the end of systole. And at the end, the software is going to calculate in 3D the percentage of volume that has disappeared between the end of diastole and the end of systole. So this is what you do. You can see over here a small axis view with diastole on top, with systole in the bottom, and you're going to get like different volume, end of systole, end of diastole, and get your ejection fraction that is going to be in between 60 and 75% when it's normal. The volumes also are important to note. The software seems to use these milliliters, and you're going to connect that to the BMI of your patient so that you can see whether it's normal or not normal. You can also assess the mass. So the mass, what is it? It is the difference between the endoluminal border and the epicardial border over here in green. And this mass of muscle, you can quantify it in 3D. Usually you do it in telediastole, and it's going to be useful in patients with the thickening of the myocardium if you want to follow in time whether this thickening is getting worse or not. And MRI is the reference method to quantify this mass. So diastole, systole, sorry. Yeah, there is something important, even if we don't have the video over here. It is to understand that the left ventricle has a motion that goes from the circumference to the center of the heart, but also that goes from the base to the apex. So once you understand that, you understand that this slice in diastole is going to be located at the base of the left ventricle, let's say over here, but during systole, the same slice that hasn't moved is going to find itself located now in the left auricle, in the left atrium. So this is important to understand if you want to contour correctly the all the contours of your diastole and all the contour of your systole. You will not contour the endoluminal border of this slice that is located in the left auricle. Otherwise, you will artificially enhance the volume of your systole without taking into account the shortening of your heart from the base to the apex. And you may change dramatically the ejection fraction that you're measuring. So again, when you measure these, especially at the base of the left ventricle, and you contour your endoluminal border of your left ventricle, be aware that you don't contour the endoluminal border if you don't have a normal thickening of your myocardium in this area, especially at the end of the system. So perfusion. Perfusion, you're doing a first pass, and with your first pass, you're injecting gadolinium at a dose of 0.1 millimolar per kilo. You're going to inject the contrast. You're going to get an enhancement of your myocardium, and then this enhancement is going to go down again. And this is what you're going to look for, because an area that it doesn't have a correct perfusion is not going to be correctly enhanced. This is what you see with this dotted line. And you're going to see that as a low signal segment that won't be enhanced by perfusion. So what you do position 5 slices that are required every RR interval. So between 2 RR intervals, you do get 5 slices, so it's really, really quick. And you repeat these sequences 30 to 40 times with usually a short axial view, a short axis view, with the possibility, however, to include a longitudinal view if you want to add information. So again, I'm sorry, I don't have a video here to show you the anomaly. It's really stupid, but you can see, I'm going to show you some other sequences that don't require perfusion. You can see here, however, that you have a correct enhancement of your left myocardium, left ventricular myocardium, which doesn't enhance correctly on the other wall of your left ventricle. So after you have injected your gadolinium, you're going to wait like 10 minutes, and after 10 minutes, you won't have a lot of gadolinium left in your left ventricle. However, if you have a diseased area, this diseased area, let's say a infarction or fibrosis, is going to enhance slowly, and you're going to have a huge difference in terms of gadolinium concentration that is going to allow you to perform a late enhancement of this myocardium with, over here, a scar that you can see with a hypersignal on the endoluminal border that you can easily differentiate from the normal myocardium, which is black. So you have to understand something. The evolution of time is critical in relation to when to make this late enhancement image. If you do make this image 1 minute after injection, you do not see a great difference between your fibrosis and your normal myocardium. This is a long axis view with the left atrium, left ventricle, and if you wait 3 minutes, you begin maybe to see a difference between the two. If you wait 5 minutes, and 10 minutes, this is where you're going to have a real difference of enhancement between your fibrosis, over here a myocardial infarction of the apex of your left ventricle, and of your normal myocardium. So waiting 10 minutes is important, at least 5 minutes, and the problem is that this time change of concentration is going to change as well the parameters of your sequence that you're going to use, and we're going to see that a bit. Okay, this is another example of enhancement of your lateral wall of your left ventricle to be differentiated to the normal wall of the anterior wall, septal, and inferior wall of the left ventricle. Another example, transmural enhancement of the apex of the left ventricle. Okay, and finally, for level 1, as you can see, we can also position slices to study motion in your arteries especially, and over here in the ascending aorta, the descending aorta, you put an axial slice, and you measure the phasing of your protons so that protons that flow quickly will be highly dephased, and this high dephasing will be measurable and will allow you to measure very precisely the maximum velocity inside an artery, having at the same time the diameter of this artery, and therefore being able to quantify the flow that is located in this artery. So you can position these slices also on the mitral valve to get like acceleration in your mitral valve in case of mitral valve disease. So let's move to level 2, and it is important now to understand in terms of sequence that all these cardiac gating sequences are based on R intervals, and this is critical. So exactly the same way you acquire an image on CT, you can acquire an image on MRI during diastole, for instance. So this is the first possibility. But the advantage of MR is that you can acquire data during diastole, during the first RR interval that you represented as gray, then other data at the same time during the next RR interval, and other data during the following RR interval. Therefore, at the end, you can perform a segmented acquisition that will slowly fill up your case space so that at the end you will get a fully reconstructed image that will make you believe that you were like, this image was acquired during 1 RR interval, but in fact it will be acquired during 3 RR interval. And this is important to understand. What you can also do is then acquire data at the beginning of systole, then during the first RR interval, and then you can see the data at the beginning of systole during the 10% of this systole, for instance, to reconstruct an image of your 10% of systole, then an image between 10 and 20% of the systole, etc., etc. So you will reconstruct many images along the RR interval so that at the end you get a CNET image, which in fact corresponds to an image that has been acquired not during 1 RR interval, but between multiple RR intervals. And you understand here that it is critical for the quality of this acquisition to get a perfect AKJ and, if possible, a very stable time between each RR signal so that you can have a clear delineation of which case space can be reconstructed at the same time. So you can also do prospective or retrospective acquisition, and the problem, all you should know is that prospective acquisitions don't acquire data that are located at the end of diastole, which is not the case of retrospective acquisition. Therefore, you should always, if possible, use retrospective acquisition to get the full CNA images of your product. So now, if we move from these general statements to the black blood imaging sequence, you should know that this sequence is based on a double inversion recovery. And this double inversion recovery uses first a non-selective 180 RF pulse that is going to invert, as you can see over here, the signal goes to minus M0. So you invert totally the signal from your body, and you wait for it to move back to 0, to relax. However, just after this non-selective 180 RF pulse, you're going to put a selective RF pulse, 180 on the other direction, so that the slice that you want to acquire is going to go back to a normal magnetization along the z-axis. You're going to wait a certain amount of time until your body has moved back to 0 to then acquire a very basic gradient equal sequence or spin equal sequence. And why is it interesting? Why is it interesting? Because during that time, all the spins that were like inverted that are going to give no signal after they reach the 0 have moved in the vessel or in the heart to another place, and therefore you're going to get a full signal out of your myocardium, but no signal from the moving spins that were located in the vessels or in your heart. So this is an interesting sequence to get a black blood image. This is what you get when you're searching for edema. However, you might get artifacts if you have slow flow in your myocardium. And this is a left ventricle with a slow flow at the apex that makes you believe that you might have a tissue over here that is just a slow flow. So be careful, be aware that this slow flow can, in fact, give rise to artifacts and might give you as well a hypersignal of the endocardium that make you believe there is an edema, whether in fact there is Then you move to the cine, and for the cine, you do have different sequences that you can use. You can either use a flash or FSPGR or FFE sequence, which are based on the use of a spoiler to remove the transversal magnetization that is still there when you use a short alpha radio frequency stimulation. And these spoilers are very useful to get an image that is especially based on the longitudinal magnetization. So they're useful, but the most used sequences are the SSFP sequences that are going to take advantage not only of the longitudinal magnetization, but also on the transversal magnetization using bipolar gradients, equilibrium gradients. I'm not going to enter into details, but I'm telling you that so that you understand the differences between these sequences that can be used at 1.5 Tesla or 3 Tesla with different advantages and disadvantages. And over there on top, you can see the classical FPGR sequence that gives you an okay contrast between the moving spins and the myocardial wall to be differentiated for a much higher contrast between your blood and the wall of the myocardium using SSFP sequences. So when you use 3 Tesla, you get more artifacts with the Fiesta or SSFP sequence, which sometimes pushes you or obliges you to use these other less contrasty sequences that would be less artifacted and that can be useful in your condition. So typical artifacts are off-resonance artifacts, and these artifacts are due to homogeneous magnetic fields, and you should shim as much as you can using these sequences to optimize your sequences, your images. Also, a typical artifact you can get at 3 Tesla is a ring artifact that is especially located in the inferior lateral wall of your left ventricle, in between your lung and your myocardium. And to optimize, to remove this artifact, you should lower your TR as much as you can, maybe by using a partial readout acquisition, and you should also optimize your local shim being now a software that you can use in your machines before it becomes more as a general shim. Another way is also to optimize the analysis of your left ventricle function is to use tag imaging, and these images are acquired by using pre-pulses that are going to create a grid on your myocardium. And this grid, which I can show it to you, is going to be stable along the motion of your left ventricle that you're going to follow. You're going to follow the grid and the deformation of these squares. So over here, during diastole and systole, the deformation of the square that you have here during diastole that is perfectly square, and during systole that becomes a rectangle here in the septum. Over here, the left ventricle that you can see between the two. Yeah, I'm going to be longer. We spoke before. We will adjust. I will be longer than about like it could be an hour or more. Thank you. And what you have then, you do have squares over here, and you're going to analyze from these squares the modification of the distance between each of the squares that are represented in blue in every direction, so that at the end you can reconstruct strained images of your left ventricle on which you can add colors that will tell you which part of your left myocardium is correctly thickened or is not correctly thickened depending on its anatomical location. The disadvantages of this technique is that you do have a spatial resolution that is limited by the distance between each square, which is usually 5 millimeters. They're very useful in clinical practice to identify processes that will only touch the subepicardium or subendocardium depending on the disease. And they're also useful to analyze the torsion motion of your heart, which is in fact not a very simple circumferential motion as you can see on MR images. It's much more complex. And you can compare that to a piece of towel that you squeeze to remove the water. This is exactly what's happening in the heart. There is a squeezing of the myocardium that is the best way to remove the blood from the inside, and that you can analyze using these strain reconstruction. There is another way to do that using a dense acquisition. These are more recent acquisitions, but they are useful as well, and they're based on two pre-pulses that will dephase and rephase non-moving spins, whether moving spins will not be rephased normally. And by doing so, you will be able to differentiate the two and to analyze the motion of the moving spins that are not correctly rephased by these pre-pulses. Okay, so if we look at perfusion imaging, first pass. So the first pass is based again on the RR interval. That needs to be stable. I want to insist on the fact that if I'm talking about these sequences, it is because when you do cardiac MRI, it is very critical to understand how it works to optimize your images. It's less technical in terms of anatomy compared to bone imaging, but it is critical in terms of quality of the image you're going to acquire to get like the right analysis. So perfusion images, as I said, you do have like 3 to 5 slices required during 1 RR interval. So it's really, really quick. And these sequences are based on a basic gradient equal sequence that is mixed with an exoplanar 2D sequence. So you do get artifacts because you do use exoplanar that is very sensitive to artifacts. And sometimes you can add an impulsion, a pre-pulse of 180 to get a T1 effect to optimize. So if you do get artifacts using these sequences, you should try to acquire this data on 1 RR only, as I spoke up to now, but some constructors do segment the acquisition on 2 RR to get a better quality of spatial resolution, but you do lower the temporal resolution and it becomes like you cannot analyze it correctly. And then you can lower your EPI factor as much as you can to get a better image. So this is typical of perfusion first pass imaging. Imagine this slice that goes along time. So first you have an enhancement of the right ventricle, then left ventricle, then your myocardium, and then you get a bit further away with decrease of the gadolinium in your heart. And this is diastole. You get no artifacts in your wall. You can see it's perfectly enhanced everywhere on the anterior, lateral, inferior, and septal wall. However, you get a ring artifact that is very typical on the lateral wall here and on the septal wall, and here you're moving towards the end of systole. So this is one slice with diastole, systole, and diastole. And you can see that this ring artifact happens during systole and can be very misleading on whether high flow perfusion exists on your subendocardium. So it is a very important artifact to know, and it's related to motion, especially to systole, but also to the Gibbs oscillation. That is a Fourier space nomenclature. So what's happening, you have a partial volume effect due to a thick slice in your left ventricle on your small axis, on which you have on one side a highly enhanced left ventricle and on the other side a non-enhanced yet myocardium. And this gives you these dark rings that you can try to avoid by enhancing your spatial resolution along the face, by avoiding a rectangular field of view and by using color imaging as much as you can. So finally, if we move to delayed enhancement of your myocardium, you're going to use sequence that is based on an inversion recovery sequence. So you're inverting all the spins to 180, and you're going to have a recovering of your normal myocardium up to 0, where you're going to then acquire your normal gradient equal sequence to differentiate the two. And your ischemic or fibrotic myocardium will enhance a lot faster because it will be richer in gadolinium, and this will give you a very strong contrast industry. So again, there is a time difference of gadolinium concentration between your normal myocardium and your fibrosis that makes difficult the choice of your inversion recovery time. And this inversion time can be either assessed manually. You can say, okay, I'm going to first try a TI of 200 milliseconds to get a black signal from my myocardium and a hyper signal from my fibrosis. or you can try to use a cine-ER sequence that is going to give you one image for different eyes, and you can see over here for different eyes, the right one, the correct one, where you can see the myocardium in black, and your hypersignal from over here, a myocardium infarction that touches the subendocardium. So this is a critical sequence to use, to work with, and we'll come back to that in the future talks. And finally, for flow, just a word to tell you that these sequences use as well some repulses. There are dephase and rephase spins, and if the spins do flow, they are not correctly rephased, and therefore you can reconstruct an image of the speed of each spins depending on the quality of the rephasing using these refocusing radiofrequency pulses. So here are the 2D images you can obtain with a hyper signal from the moving spins and a low signal of the moving spins in the other direction, from which you can, as we saw already, calculate speeds and different parameters that are useful to characterize your vessels. So again, over here you have to work on the bank, which is the maximum velocity that you believe is going to happen in your vessel, so that you don't saturate your spins. So you have to know before you perform your acquisition what is maximum velocity in, for instance, the aorta. So you're usually going to find 200 meters per second. And if you underestimate, you will saturate. If you overestimate, you will decrease your resolution in terms of quantification. And you would try as much as you can to align flow and phase direction, knowing that a 20% error will lead you to a 6% error in velocity, and you will work, if possible, at the isocenter. Okay, this is just an image of the mitral valve. Okay, so finally, conclusion. I recommend to the resident to really know the anatomy, as it helps to understand the complications that you have clinically with the disease, so it's really important. You should study cardiac MR, even if you don't understand everything about sequences. You have to begin at one point. But then, of course, once you're in it, learn about sequences to better optimize your sequences and avoid artifacts. I want to also tell you that all this presentation was based on 3 excellent reviews that have been done, written by Magali Gallo and Pierre Croisy, Mr. Bitar and Ridgway in EMC, l'encyclopédie médicale, in Radiographics in 2006, and GCMR, the most recent one, 2000. Thank you.